The day has done all it needs to do. Now only stillness remains. Let your thoughts loosen, like threads unraveling in the dark. What comes next is not to solve or to chase, just a quiet story drifting close. Perhaps it's a voice that remembers you, or a silence that has waited patiently. Let it meet you where you are, and let it lead you gently into rest. The old house stood on a quiet lane, its windows like tired eyes watching the world drift by. It wasn't the kind of place that screamed haunted, more like one that whispered forgotten. Elara, with her perpetually hopeful heart and a recent inheritance check that felt more like a cosmic joke than a blessing, had bought it on a whim. Or perhaps it was less a whim and more a desperate attempt to outrun the ghost of a failed engagement and a sputtering career in textile design. She envisioned quaint tea parties, sun-drenched reading nooks, and a life far removed from city noise and heartbreak. The reality, as often happens, was somewhat different. The house, named Blackwood Manor by some long-departed, probably melancholic ancestor, was indeed old. And dusty. Very, very dusty. But beneath layers of neglect, Elara saw potential, especially in the sprawling, shadowy library that took up an entire wing of the ground floor. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves carved from what looked like ancient oak lined every wall, overflowing with books that smelled of time and forgotten ink. It was less a library and more a labyrinth of forgotten narratives. Her best friend, Liam, a perpetually sarcastic but fiercely loyal architect, had been less than enthusiastic about her purchase. Elara, it looks like a setting for a Gothic novel. Not a fresh start, he'd said, eyeing a suspiciously creaky floorboard during their first tour. Are you sure you want to live in a place where the wallpaper probably remembers the original owner's last breath? Elara had just laughed, already picturing herself nestled amongst the dusty tomes, a cup of Earl Grey steaming beside her. The library, in particular, called to her. She wasn't a scholar, nor a particularly avid reader of classics, but there was something undeniably romantic about a room dedicated solely to stories. Her first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes, wiping away decades of grime and discovering peculiar antique items tucked away in forgotten drawers. A porcelain doll with one missing eye, a tarnished silver locket containing a faded miniature portrait of a stern-looking woman, and a collection of dried flowers pressed between the pages of a forgotten hymnal. Each discovery added another layer to the house's silent story. But it was the library that truly captivated her. It was a monumental task to even begin organizing it. Books were stacked haphazardly, titles ranging from forgotten poetry to ancient scientific treatises. One afternoon, while attempting to re-shelve a particularly heavy volume on obscure botanical illustrations, Elara noticed something peculiar. Behind a row of particularly weighty, leather-bound books nestled deep within the shelf was a narrow, almost imperceptible slit. It was so well hidden, so perfectly integrated into the aged wood, that it could easily be mistaken for a natural imperfection in the grain. Curiosity, that ever-present and often troublesome companion, pricked at her. She ran her fingers along the smooth, cool surface of the wood, feeling for any give. There was none. It was a secret, expertly concealed. Her heart gave a little flutter. This was precisely the kind of quaint mystery she'd hoped for, a harmless little adventure to distract her from the lingering ache of her past. She pulled out the row of books, revealing a small, shallow compartment, just big enough to hold something. And there it was. Not a jewel, not a stack of forgotten gold coins, but a single folded letter tied with a thin, faded green ribbon. It looked old, incredibly old, the paper a brittle, cream color, edged with a delicate brown of time. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just old. It felt significant. A forgotten message waiting for generations to be found. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but it was a thrill, not a chill of fear. It felt like destiny, a little personal treasure hunt meant just for her. She carefully untied the ribbon, her fingers trembling slightly. The paper crackled softly as she unfolded it. The ink, though faded, was still legible, written in an elegant, flowing script that spoke of a bygone era. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and a name leaped out at her, a name that would soon become inextricably linked with the very fabric of Blackwood Manor. My dearest Arthur. The name Arthur resonated with a quiet hum in the otherwise silent library. Elara's heart beat a little faster, a mix of anticipation and a strange, almost voyeuristic guilt. This was someone's private correspondence, a whisper from the past. But the sheer age of it and its hidden location felt like an invitation, a secret waiting to be unveiled. She began to read, slowly, letting the elegant script and faded ink transport her. The letter was from a woman named Eleanor, and it was addressed to her dearest Arthur. The tone was one of deep affection, tinged with an underlying current of anxiety. Eleanor wrote of her longing for Arthur's return, mentioning his travels, though the purpose of these travels remained vague. There were mentions of the family and their disapproval, hinting at a romance that was perhaps not sanctioned. Elara found herself leaning closer, captivated by the unfolding drama. Eleanor's words painted a picture of quiet desperation. She spoke of her solitude in the house, of pacing the very halls Elara now walked. The silence here can be deafening, my love, the letter read, save for the wind in the chimneys and the creaking of the old house settling into its bones. I miss your laughter, Arthur, more than words can convey. A particular passage caught Elara's eye, making her pause. I have found solace, dear Arthur, in the little room upstairs, where the light is purest and the air feels less burdened. There I continue my work, though my heart is heavy with your absence. But I dream of a day when we can truly be together, when this shadow that hangs over us will finally lift. The little room upstairs. Elara wondered which one that might be. The house had many, and several were still filled with forgotten furniture, covered in white sheets like slumbering ghosts. Eleanor also spoke of a specific item, something precious to her. I keep your locket close to my heart, a constant reminder of your promise. It is the only thing that truly connects me to you when you are away. Please, Arthur, return to me soon. I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather, a premonition that steals my sleep. Elara instinctively touched the small, tarnished silver locket she had found earlier, tucked away in a dusty drawer in the living room. Could it be the locket? The thought sent a prickle of unease up her spine. It seemed too much of a coincidence. Had she unwittingly stumbled upon the very threads of Eleanor's life? As she continued reading, the letter's tone grew more urgent, more desperate. Eleanor expressed fears for Arthur's safety, hints of danger that Elara couldn't quite decipher. The whispers grow louder, Arthur, of those who wish us ill. Be careful, my love. For my sake, be careful. The words felt heavy, imbued with an unspoken tension. The final lines were heart-wrenching. I will hide this letter, my dearest, where only you will think to look. It is a testament to our love, a desperate plea for your swift return. Should anything untoward befall me, remember that my last thought was of you, and my last hope was for our future. Find me, Arthur. Find me here among the stories we shared. The letter was unsigned, as if the urgency of her message overshadowed the formality of a farewell. Elara carefully refolded the letter, her mind reeling. It wasn't just a quaint historical artifact. It was a cry from the past, a story of forbidden love and looming tragedy. The raw emotion in Eleanor's words transcended time, making the woman feel incredibly real, almost present in the quiet library. She looked around the room, seeing the bookshelves not just as shelves, but as silent witnesses to Eleanor's hopes and fears. The little room upstairs, the locket, the mysterious shadow hanging over them. These were not just details in a letter, but tangible connections to a woman whose heart had bled onto these very pages. A strange sense of responsibility settled over Elara. She had found Eleanor's secret, and now it felt like she had a part to play in its conclusion. What had happened to Eleanor? And to Arthur? The letter offered no answers, only questions that echoed in the silent house. The revelation of Eleanor's letter left Elara with a strange, lingering sense of duty. The house, which had once felt like a blank canvas for her new life, now seemed imbued with a past that demanded recognition. She couldn't just shelve the letter and forget about it. Eleanor's plea for Arthur to find me echoed in her mind. This wasn't just a story. It felt like a mission. Her immediate thought was to share this extraordinary find with Liam. He was logical, grounded, and possessed a healthy skepticism that Elara often found herself lacking. She knew he'd probably suggest she was romanticizing an old letter, but she also knew he'd be fascinated despite himself. The next morning, armed with the fragile letter and a pot of strong coffee, Elara waited for Liam to arrive. He usually dropped by for their ritualistic house assessment, his term for poking around and making subtly disapproving noises about the manor's structural integrity. When he finally arrived, looking impeccably put together despite the early hour, Elara practically shoved the letter into his hands before he could even comment on the dust motes dancing in the morning light. "Liam, you won't believe what I found," she exclaimed, her voice buzzing with excitement. He took the letter, his brow furrowing as he noticed its antique appearance. "Looks like something out of a period drama," he mused, unfolding it carefully. As he read, his usual sardonic smirk slowly faded, replaced by a look of genuine intrigue. He read it once, then again, his eyes scanning the elegant script, lingering on the urgent pleas within Eleanor's words. "My dearest Arthur," he murmured, his voice surprisingly soft. "This is powerful, Elara. Really powerful." He looked up at her, a new light in his eyes. "So you found this tucked away in the library? Behind some books?" Elara nodded, her excitement contagious. "Exactly. And remember that locket I found? The silver one with the faded portrait? Eleanor mentions a locket she keeps close to her heart as a reminder of Arthur's promise. Liam's eyes widened slightly. No way. You think it's the same locket? He pulled out his phone, already searching for historical records of Blackwood Manor. This house is centuries old. We're talking serious history here. Eleanor and Arthur. A forbidden love, danger lurking. It's straight out of a novel. His skepticism hadn't vanished entirely, but it was now laced with a palpable curiosity. Okay, so what do you want to do with it? Beyond just, being super creepy and fascinating. I don't know, Elara admitted, pacing around the library. But I feel like we have to find out what happened to them. The letter says she hid it where only you will think to look, implying Arthur would know some secret spot. And she asks him to find me. It sounds like she vanished, or something worse. Liam leaned against a towering bookshelf, his gaze sweeping over the vast collection. So a historical cold case, then? With a romantic twist. All right, Elara, you've got my attention. This is certainly more interesting than deciding between beige and off-white paint samples. They spent the rest of the morning poring over the letter, dissecting every phrase, every nuanced hint. They speculated about the family's disapproval and those who wish us ill. Was it a rival suitor? A disapproving patriarch? The possibilities were endless, and each one added another layer to the mystery. Liam, ever the pragmatist, suggested they start by trying to date the letter more precisely. The style of writing, the paper, we might be able to narrow down the time period. That could help us search for records, birth, death, marriage certificates, anything that might mention an Eleanor and an Arthur connected to this property. As they talked, a quiet understanding settled between them. This wasn't just Elara's solitary quest anymore. It was a shared endeavor. The silence of Blackwood Manor, once a peaceful backdrop, now felt charged with the echoes of a past waiting to be unearthed. The hidden letter had not just revealed a secret. It had opened a doorway, and Elara, with Liam by her side, was ready to step through it. The forgotten story of Eleanor and Arthur was slowly beginning to stir, pulling them deeper into its enigmatic embrace. With Liam's analytical mind now fully engaged, the search for Eleanor and Arthur shifted from an emotional revelation to a methodical investigation. Their first step was indeed to establish a more precise timeline for the letter. Liam, with his architectural background, had an unexpected knack for historical details. He meticulously examined the paper, the faded ink, and even the style of the ribbon. This paper, the way it's aged, it suggests late 18th to early 19th century. Liam mused, holding the letter up to the light in the library. The quality of the paper is quite good for the time, indicating someone of means. And the handwriting, it's a beautiful copperplate script, common among educated women of that era. Elara, meanwhile, was doing her own kind of detective work, less scientific, but no less determined. She felt drawn to the little room upstairs Eleanor had mentioned. The house had many rooms, but she intuitively felt it would be one of the sunnier, quieter ones, perhaps facing the garden. After a good hour of exploration, she found a small, almost hidden door leading to a surprisingly bright room in the east wing. It was sparsely furnished, unlike the other cluttered rooms, containing only a delicate writing desk near a window and a single faded armchair. It felt different, lighter, as if the air itself held a faint memory of presence rather than just dust. "This has to be it," she whispered to herself, tracing a finger over the smooth, worn surface of the desk. There were faint indentations on the wood, as if someone had pressed down hard with a pen, lost in thought. It was a tangible link to Eleanor, a quiet testament to her existence within these very walls. That evening, over takeout, Liam presented his initial findings. He had cross-referenced various historical records online, focusing on property deeds and census data related to Blackwood Manor. "Okay, so here's what I've got," he began, spreading out printouts on the dining table. The manor was built around 1780 by a prominent family, the Ainsworths. They were merchants, quite wealthy, and the first found a record of an Eleanor Ainsworth, born around 1785, who was the daughter of the then owner, a strict patriarch named Lord Alistair Ainsworth. Elara's eyes widened. Eleanor Ainsworth? So she was part of the family? "Looks like it," Liam confirmed, circling a name on a faded family tree. "And get this, there's no record of her ever marrying. The family history notes her as having a delicate constitution and mentions she lived a rather secluded life within the manor, often dedicating herself to artistic pursuits. She passed away quite young, around 1810, just 25 years old." A wave of sadness washed over Elara. 25? So young. And the letter, with its urgent plea, was likely written just before her untimely death. This made the mystery even more poignant. "What about Arthur?" Liam continued. "Now here's where it gets interesting, and a little frustrating. There's no mention of an Arthur in any of the Ainsworth family records. No husbands, no fiancés, no acknowledged lovers. It's almost as if he was deliberately erased from their history, or he was never meant to be a part of it." "So a forbidden love," Elara murmured, the words of Eleanor's letter echoing in her mind. "The family, their disapproval, those who wish us ill." It all started to coalesce into a tragic picture. Eleanor, a woman of means, secretly in love with a man her family didn't approve of, perhaps even actively scorned. "Precisely," Liam agreed. "Which means Arthur likely wasn't from their social circle, or perhaps he was already promised to someone else, or involved in something scandalous. The more we dig, the more it sounds like a classical tragic romance, minus the happy ending, so far." They discussed the implications late into the night. Eleanor's death at such a young age, the complete absence of Arthur from the family records, the hidden letter, it all painted a picture of a love story cut short, perhaps by external forces or by a broken heart. The chill Eleanor mentioned in her letter, the premonition that stole her sleep, now felt like a premonition of her own demise, or perhaps of Arthur's permanent absence. Elara looked at the old house around her, no longer just a fixer-upper but a silent mausoleum of a secret love. The hidden letter wasn't just a message. It was a testament, a final declaration from a woman whose life had been tragically brief and whose greatest love had been denied. And now Elara felt even more compelled to find out what had truly transpired, not just for herself, but for Eleanor. The more Elara and Liam delved into the sparse historical records, the more the mystery surrounding Eleanor and Arthur deepened. The official narrative painted Eleanor as a frail, reclusive figure, but the letter revealed a passionate, fearful woman desperately clinging to a forbidden love. It was a stark contrast, suggesting a carefully constructed facade by the Ainsworth family, perhaps to protect their reputation. It's like they wanted her to disappear from history, at least in connection to Arthur, Elara mused, poring over a faded map of the manor grounds Liam had found. If she truly died at 25, and he was never mentioned, it almost feels too neat. Liam agreed, tapping a finger on a particularly vague entry in an old parish register. The official cause of death is listed as consumption, a catch-all for various illnesses back then. But the timing, combined with her anxieties in the letter, it's certainly suspicious. They spent days researching, becoming amateur historians, their lives revolving around dusty archives and quiet speculation. Elara often found herself in the library, not just for research, but simply to be in the space where Eleanor's secret had rested for so long. She'd run her hand along the oak shelves, imagining Eleanor doing the same, her heart aching for her absent lover. One afternoon, while tidying a neglected corner of the library, Elara stumbled upon a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace. It was so well hidden, almost camouflaged against the dark wood, that it clearly hadn't been disturbed in a very long time. Her heart leaped. This wasn't a formal document, it felt personal. She pulled it out carefully. The leather was cracked and dry, and the pages within were yellowed and brittle. There was no name on the cover, but the elegant, familiar script inside immediately told her who the author was. It was Eleanor's journal. The first few entries were mundane, detailing daily life at Blackwood Manor, the weather and observations about the garden. But soon the tone shifted. Eleanor began to write about her clandestine meetings with Arthur, describing him with an adoration that brought a flush to Elara's cheeks just reading it. Arthur was depicted as a charming, adventurous man, kind-hearted and fiercely devoted to Eleanor. He was not of her social standing, however, and his background was shrouded in a deliberate vagueness in the journal entries. He was often away on business, which Eleanor lamented, though she never specified the nature of his work. Then came the entries that made Elara's blood run cold. Eleanor started hinting at her family's disapproval of Arthur, not just disdain, but active opposition. "Father grows colder with each passing day," she wrote. "He suspects my affections lie elsewhere, and his eyes, usually so distant, now seem to pierce through me. I fear his wrath, for it is absolute." Later entries became more fragmented, filled with an increasing sense of dread. "Arthur speaks of leaving, of making a life for us far from here, where Father's shadow cannot reach," one entry read. "But my health? It falters. A cough plagues me, and weariness is my constant companion. I fear I am not strong enough to brave the journey." This was the consumption mentioned in the official records, but Eleanor's words gave it a tragic, emotional context that official documents could never convey. A particularly disturbing entry, dated only a few weeks before her supposed death, made Elara gasp aloud. "I heard Father speaking with his solicitor. Whispers of an annulment of a forced marriage to old Lord Bellingham's son. And a darker suggestion, a solution to my unfortunate attachment. I tremble with fear, not for myself, but for Arthur. They would stop at nothing to sever our bond." The final entries were heart-wrenching. Eleanor detailed her declining health, her profound loneliness, and her desperate longing for Arthur's return. There was a growing paranoia, a sense of being watched, listened to. "The walls have ears," she scribbled unevenly. "Even the shadows feel like judgment." The very last entry was barely legible, a hurried scrawl. Arthur, my love, I feel myself fading. They speak of isolating me, of sending me away. I have placed the letter where only you will find it. A final plea. Do not forget me. Come for me. My locket, it is all I have left of you. Find me in the silence. Elara stared at the journal, tears pricking her eyes. Eleanor hadn't just died of consumption. She had been trapped, slowly wasting away under the crushing weight of her family's control. Her love for Arthur, her only solace, and ultimately her undoing. The chilling premonition in the letter wasn't just about Arthur. It was about her own impending doom, orchestrated or at least exacerbated by her family. The locket, a symbol of their love, was her last tangible connection. This wasn't just a love story anymore. It was a tragedy tinged with cruelty and the chilling possibility of something far more sinister than a broken heart. The gentle, melancholic atmosphere of Blackwood Manor now felt heavy with unspoken sorrow and a profound sense of injustice. The discovery of Eleanor's journal cast a long, dark shadow over Elara's perception of Blackwood Manor. The house was no longer just old. It was heavy with the weight of unrequited love and a chilling familial conspiracy. The delicate constitution mentioned in the family records now seemed a cruel euphemism for a spirit slowly crushed by circumstance and control. Elara shared the journal with Liam, her voice hushed with the gravity of Eleanor's final entries. Liam, usually composed, grew visibly agitated as he read Eleanor's desperate words. They essentially imprisoned her, he stated, his jaw tight. Forced her into isolation, probably withheld proper care, all to break her will and sever her connection to Arthur. This isn't just a sad love story, Elara. This is outright cruelty. The mention of forced marriage and a solution to my unfortunate attachment chilled them both to the bone. The journal ignited a new fire in Elara. She felt a profound connection to Eleanor, a desire to honor her story and, somehow, find the justice that had been denied to her in life. We have to find out what happened to Arthur, Elara insisted. Eleanor dedicated her last thoughts to him. He was her only hope. Their research became more focused, a desperate search for any trace of the elusive Arthur. They expanded their search beyond the immediate vicinity of Blackwood Manor, looking for anyone named Arthur who might have had a connection to the Ainsworth family or the broader region in the late 18th or early 19th century. It was like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. One afternoon, while sifting through old newspaper archives at a local historical society, Liam found a tiny, almost hidden obituary. It was for a Captain Arthur Holloway, a merchant marine, who had died at sea in 1809. The dates roughly aligned with Eleanor's last journal entry and her death in 1810. The obituary was brief, stating only that he was lost during a particularly violent storm in the Atlantic, his ship, the Sea Serpent, having gone down with all hands. A cold dread settled over Elara as she read it. Could this be their Arthur? The thought of him sailing back to Eleanor, oblivious to her plight, only to be lost at sea, was a gut-wrenching twist of fate. It was the cruelest irony, a love story doomed not by malice, but by the relentless indifference of the ocean. This could be him, Liam said, his voice quiet. A merchant marine would have been constantly traveling, explaining his absences. And the social disparity, the unfortunate attachment. A ship captain, even a successful one, wouldn't have been seen as a suitable match for a lord's daughter by someone like Lord Ainsworth. The implications were devastating. If Captain Arthur Holloway was indeed Eleanor's Arthur, then he had never received her last letter, never known of her suffering, never had the chance to come for her. He had died at sea, far from the woman who loved him, while she was slowly fading, believing he would come. Elara felt a wave of profound sorrow. "So he never knew," she whispered, her voice catching. "He never knew she was waiting, that she was in danger. And she died thinking he'd abandoned her, or that her premonition of him being harmed had come true." The tragedy was almost unbearable. They continued to dig, desperate for more connections, anything to confirm or deny their fears. They found a shipping manifest from a port in Bristol, listing Captain Arthur Holloway as the master of the Sea Serpent on its final voyage. The dates aligned perfectly with Eleanor's last journal entries and her death. It felt like a tightening knot in their stomachs, confirmation of the bitter end to their story. The silence of Blackwood Manor now felt different. It wasn't just forgotten. It was filled with the echoes of a love that had been so close to salvation, only to be snatched away by circumstances beyond their control. Eleanor's plea to find me took on a new, heartbreaking meaning. She wasn't just asking Arthur to find her physically. She was asking him to find her spirit, to understand her truth, and to remember their love. And now Elara and Liam, two strangers centuries later, were unwittingly fulfilling that final wish. The hidden letter, once a quaint mystery, had become a profound testament to enduring love and unimaginable loss. The crushing weight of Arthur Holloway's presumed fate settled heavily upon Elara. It felt like a fresh wound, centuries old, bleeding into the quiet rooms of Blackwood Manor. Eleanor had clung to hope, and that hope had been swallowed by the sea, leaving her to fade away, believing herself abandoned. The injustice of it all resonated deeply with Elara, whose own romantic entanglements had recently ended in a feeling of abandonment, though far less tragically. Liam, ever the steady presence, observed her quiet distress. "It's a heavy burden, isn't it?" he said softly, finding her in the library, staring out one of the tall windows at the now gloomy sky. To uncover such a profound sorrow, Elara nodded. "It's just..." She deserved to know. He deserved to know. Their story was so close to a different ending, wasn't it? If only he'd arrived a little sooner, if only that storm hadn't happened. The what-ifs hung in the air like a shroud. Their shared discovery had forged an even deeper bond between Elara and Liam. What started as a casual friendship had evolved into a partnership fueled by a common purpose: to honor Eleanor's memory and, in some small way, to bring peace to her restless spirit. They continued to search, not for more factual answers about Arthur's death, which seemed tragically confirmed, but for anything that might shed light on Eleanor's final days, or perhaps a trace of what she wished for Arthur to find beyond the letter itself. They revisited the little room upstairs, Eleanor's sanctuary. Elara felt a renewed sense of connection to the space. She imagined Eleanor sitting at the writing desk, penning her hopes and fears, watching the same garden view. It was a simple room, yet it held a potent echo of a life lived and lost. They meticulously searched every crevice, every loose floorboard, every hidden compartment, but found nothing more. It seemed Eleanor's secrets were only ever meant for Arthur. One evening, Elara was alone in the library, the glow of her reading lamp casting long shadows across the towering bookshelves. She had spent the day cleaning and organizing the very books that had once hidden Eleanor's plea. It was a meditative task, her hands running over the spines, feeling the texture of leather and aged paper. She was almost finished with one section when her fingers brushed against something unexpected behind a large, forgotten tome on ancient philosophy. It wasn't another letter, nor a journal. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box. Her breath caught in her throat. The box was no larger than her palm, made of dark, polished wood, perhaps ebony, and unadorned except for a single, delicate silver inlay of a swirling vine on its lid. It was undeniably old, the wood smooth and cool beneath her touch. It had been placed so precisely behind the heavy book that it would have been impossible to find unless the book was completely removed. With trembling fingers, Elara lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not another document, but a single, perfectly preserved pressed flower. It was a forget-me-not, its tiny blue petals still vibrant despite the passage of centuries. Beneath the flower, on a small folded piece of paper, a single word was written in Eleanor's elegant script: Arthur. A wave of emotion washed over Elara. The simplicity of the find was devastating. A forget-me-not, a symbol of enduring remembrance, and Arthur's name scrawled as a final testament to her love. This wasn't a desperate plea for rescue, but a quiet, enduring promise. It was her way of saying, "Remember me, remember us," a last, tangible connection for the man she believed would eventually find her. The meaning was clear. Eleanor hadn't just hidden a letter. She had left a final, poignant message of undying love and memory. She wanted Arthur to know, even if she couldn't tell him herself, that she had never forgotten him and that their love lived on. Elara carefully closed the box, holding it close to her heart. The forgotten tragedy of Eleanor and Arthur now felt complete, their story fully unveiled. Eleanor's spirit, trapped in a house of sorrows, now had its voice heard, its love acknowledged. And in finding it, Elara felt a strange sense of peace settling over the old manor, a quiet whisper that Eleanor's long vigil was finally over. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of release, its secrets finally laid bare. The tiny wooden box with its single, poignant forget-me-not was a silent testament to Eleanor's enduring love. It was a message across time, not just for Arthur, but now, inadvertently, for Elara. She felt a profound shift in the atmosphere of Blackwood Manor. The melancholic quiet that had initially drawn her in now seemed to carry a lighter, more settled air. It was as if Eleanor's long-held secret, once discovered, had released a palpable sense of peace within the old house. Elara placed the box carefully on a small, antique table in the library, a spot where the morning sun would often filter through the tall windows. It wasn't just a relic. It was a symbol, a tiny monument to a love that had defied time and tragedy. Liam, upon seeing it, understood immediately. He didn't need a lengthy explanation. The delicate flower and the single name spoke volumes. She wanted him to remember, Liam said, his voice soft. And she made sure there was a way, even if he never found the letter. And now we remember, Elara added, a sense of completion settling over her. They had pieced together the fragments of a shattered love story, given a voice to a woman silenced by circumstance, and confirmed the fate of her beloved. It felt like a small, quiet victory against the relentless march of time and forgotten histories. With Eleanor's story seemingly complete, Elara found herself looking at Blackwood Manor with new eyes. The house no longer felt like a place haunted by unresolved sorrows, but rather a repository of profound human experience. The dust seemed less oppressive, the creaks less ominous, replaced by a gentle whisper of resilience. She began to spend more time in the library, not for research, but for quiet contemplation. She would sit in the worn armchair, surrounded by the towering bookshelves, and simply be. Sometimes she imagined Eleanor there, too, a faint, contented presence. The thought no longer sent shivers of fear down her spine, but rather a comforting sense of connection. Her own life, which had felt so adrift when she first arrived at Blackwood Manor, slowly began to anchor itself. The ache of her past relationship began to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose and a quiet appreciation for the present. The process of uncovering Eleanor's story had, in an unexpected way, helped Elara confront her own lingering feelings of heartbreak and disappointment. She realized that even in profound loss, there was a quiet dignity, a strength in holding on to love despite all odds. One afternoon, while Elara was reorganizing some of the older, untouched volumes in a far corner of the library, she felt a subtle draft. It was unusual, as the windows were closed, and there were no obvious vents nearby. She dismissed it as the old house settling, a common occurrence. But then she felt it again, a faint, cool current of air, almost like a whisper brushing past her ear. She paused, her hand resting on a thick, leather-bound book titled Journeys of the Distant East. The draft seemed to emanate from directly behind it. Elara pulled the heavy book from the shelf, and behind it, nestled in a small, unseen recess in the back of the shelf, was another item. It wasn't a letter or a journal this time. It was a small, intricately carved wooden picture frame, no larger than her palm. Her heart began to pound with a quiet intensity. This felt different from the initial discovery of the letter or the box. This felt deliberate, as if it had been placed there after Eleanor's death by someone else. The frame was dark, aged wood, similar to the small box she had found. Inside, protected by a thin, cloudy pane of glass, was a miniature portrait. Elara held it up to the light, her breath catching. It was a man, painted with remarkable detail. He had kind, intelligent eyes, a strong jawline, and a slight, knowing smile. He wasn't conventionally handsome in a flamboyant way, but there was an undeniable magnetism about him, an air of quiet strength and gentle determination. And Elara knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, exactly who it was. It was Arthur, but who had placed it there? And why? This discovery opened a new, unsettling layer to the mystery. It suggested that someone else knew of their love, someone who had mourned them both, and who had perhaps returned to the house to leave this final, poignant tribute. The peace Elara had felt moments before was replaced by a prickle of renewed curiosity, a silent question echoing through the quiet library. The miniature portrait of Arthur, hidden so carefully behind Journeys of the Distant East, reignited the embers of the mystery. Elara traced the delicate lines of his face, his kind eyes seeming to meet hers across the centuries. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a profound question. Who, after Eleanor's death, would have placed this portrait here? It suggested an intimate knowledge of Eleanor's secrets, a silent acknowledgement of her forbidden love. The peace Elara had felt in the house now coexisted with a renewed sense of intrigue. Liam, ever the voice of reason, suggested they broaden their research, looking not just for Eleanor and Arthur, but for anyone else connected to the Ainsworth family who might have been an ally or confidant to Eleanor. Someone new, he insisted, examining the frame. This wasn't left by Lord Ainsworth, that's for sure. It would have been destroyed. They delved back into the dusty records, focusing on peripheral figures mentioned in Eleanor's journal. A trusted maid, a distant cousin, perhaps even a sympathetic family friend. The trail was faint, obscured by time, and the inherent privacy of personal relationships in that era. One afternoon, while Elara was meticulously cleaning a rarely used drawing room, she discovered another small, hidden space. This time it was behind a loose panel in the ornate wainscoting near a rarely used fireplace. Inside, wrapped in a piece of delicate, faded silk, was a small, intricately embroidered handkerchief. It was a beautiful piece, clearly hand-stitched, with a delicate border of forget-me-nots, and in one corner, the initials M.I. were. Elara's heart fluttered. Could this be another clue, another piece of the puzzle? The forget-me-nots immediately brought to mind the flower in the wooden box Eleanor had left for Arthur. It felt significant. They immediately scoured the Ainsworth family tree and local historical archives for anyone with the initials, who might have been connected to Eleanor during her lifetime. It was a painstaking process, but eventually Liam found a promising lead. A distant cousin, Martha Ainsworth, who was approximately Eleanor's age and had lived at Blackwood Manor for a brief period as a companion to Eleanor during her delicate constitution. Martha's family had later moved to a neighboring county, and her lineage seemed to fade from prominent records. Martha Ainsworth, Liam repeated, tapping a finger on the name in a digitized family ledger. Described as of a quiet disposition, but deeply devoted to her family. Could she have been Eleanor's confidant? Someone who knew about Arthur? The idea made perfect sense. A quiet cousin, overlooked by the strict Lord Ainsworth, might have been the perfect person for Eleanor to confide in. And if Martha was devoted to Eleanor, she might have sought to preserve her memory and Arthur's after their tragic deaths. They searched for any further records of Martha, particularly after Eleanor's passing. It was difficult, as her family wasn't as prominent as the main Ainsworth line. However, a local genealogy forum unearthed a tiny snippet, a letter fragment from a descendant mentioning an ancestor, Great-Aunt Martha, who spoke often of a tragic love story from her youth at Blackwood Manor and a lost sailor. Elara felt a thrill of recognition. This had to be it. Martha. She had been Eleanor's witness, her silent guardian, perhaps the only one who truly understood the depth of Eleanor's love and the cruel injustice of her fate. It was Martha who, in all likelihood, had taken Arthur's portrait and hidden it, a sacred trust, to ensure his image was preserved within the walls where his love story had unfolded. And the handkerchief, a small, intimate token of remembrance, possibly gifted to Martha by Eleanor, or even embroidered by Martha herself in silent solidarity. The mystery of who had left Arthur's portrait was solved, but it opened up a new emotional layer. It highlighted the quiet strength of female bonds in a restrictive era, and the lengths to which devotion could go to honor a lost love. Martha had been Eleanor's silent confidant, her ally in a world that sought to control her. The house no longer felt like a place of unanswered questions, but rather a quiet memorial to enduring love, friendship, and unspoken sorrow. Eleanor's story, once hidden, was now fully revealed, illuminated by the quiet dedication of a loyal friend. And Elara, standing amidst the silent books, felt a profound sense of connection to these women, their lives intertwined across centuries by the delicate threads of love and memory. The discovery of Martha Ainsworth's role as Eleanor's loyal confidant brought a profound sense of closure to the tragic love story. It was a testament to the quiet power of female friendship, a bond strong enough to defy the societal strictures of the time and preserve a forbidden love. Elara spent a few days simply savoring this newfound understanding, allowing the threads of the past to settle into a coherent, if heartbreaking, tapestry. The house felt lighter, almost breathable, the shadows less ominous, and more like quiet observers. Elara and Liam continued their work on Blackwood Manor, but with a different purpose. It was no longer just about renovation. It was about preservation. They carefully restored some of the older, more fragile books in the library, ensuring Eleanor's literary companions would endure. They cleaned and polished Arthur's portrait and Eleanor's delicate wooden box, giving them a place of honor on a small, untouched side table in the library, a quiet memorial. Liam, ever practical, had suggested they might reach out to distant Ainsworth descendants, if any could be found, to share the extraordinary story of Eleanor and Arthur. Elara, however, felt a sense of protectiveness over the story. It felt deeply personal, a secret unveiled to her alone, and she wasn't sure she wanted to share it with the wider world, or with people who might not understand its delicate nuances. The silence of the manor, now imbued with a gentle sadness rather than a haunting chill, felt right. One evening, a little over a month after finding Arthur's portrait, Elara was in the library, caught in the quiet rhythm of the house. The sun had set and the room was bathed in the soft glow of a few lamps. She was reshelving a particularly large, heavy volume on ancient mythology, a book she was sure Eleanor must have often pulled from the shelf, its weight familiar in her hands. As she pushed it back into its slot, her fingers brushed against something. It wasn't hidden behind the book this time, or in a secret compartment. It was tucked inside the very pages of the book, almost as if it had been a bookmark, long forgotten. Her heart gave a soft thump. What else could there be? She carefully pulled the book back out and opened it to the page where she'd felt the obstruction. Nestled between two yellowed pages pressed flat and almost translucent with age, was a single thin strand of hair, tied with a tiny, almost invisible piece of black thread. It was long and dark, a deep, rich brown that looked almost black in the dim light. It shimmered faintly, catching the lamp's glow. Elara felt a strange electric tingle trace down her arm. This wasn't a letter or a locket or a portrait. This was a direct, intimate physical remnant. Whose hair was it? Eleanor's? Arthur's? Or perhaps Martha's, placed there as a final silent farewell from a grieving friend? She carefully lifted the strand with tweezers, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. It felt incredibly fragile, a whisper of a past life. This wasn't a secret meant to be found. It was an accidental preservation, a piece of someone's very essence suspended in time. As she held it, a faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted from the pages, a ghostly whisper of lavender and old paper. Lavender, a scent Eleanor had mentioned in one of her journal entries describing her mother's garden. It felt undeniably like Eleanor's. This quiet, personal discovery didn't open a new mystery to solve, but rather deepened the profound connection Elara felt to Eleanor. It was a tangible link, a small, fragile piece of the woman whose story had so unexpectedly intertwined with her own. It was a quiet affirmation that Eleanor had truly walked these halls, her hopes and sorrows imprinted not just on letters and journals, but on the very fabric of the house itself. The house wasn't just a place where a story had happened. It was a place where life had been lived, loved, and remembered, down to the very strands of her hair. The strand of Eleanor's hair, tucked away in the pages of an old book, was the most intimate discovery yet. It wasn't a narrative clue. It was a sensory one, a direct physical link to the woman whose presence now felt so palpable in the house. Elara held it carefully, a whisper of a lifelong past, almost feeling the weight of Eleanor's unspoken words, her hopes, and her quiet despair. This wasn't about solving a mystery anymore. It was about honoring a memory. With the core story of Eleanor and Arthur now fully revealed, Elara found a new rhythm in her days at Blackwood Manor. The house was no longer just a project, but a quiet companion, a living archive of human emotion. She found herself sharing anecdotes about Eleanor with Liam, weaving the fragments of her life into a cohesive narrative. Liam, in turn, offered his own quiet observations, adding depth to their shared understanding. One particularly quiet afternoon, Elara was drawn back to the little room upstairs, Eleanor's sanctuary. She sat in the faded armchair by the window, the same spot where Eleanor might have sought solace. The light was purest here, just as Eleanor had written, and the air did feel less burdened. She closed her eyes, trying to imagine the room as it had been, filled with the presence of a young woman yearning for her love. As she sat there, a subtle chill, not unpleasant, brushed against her arm. It was similar to the fleeting draft she'd felt in the library when she found Arthur's portrait. She opened her eyes, scanning the room. Nothing. The window was closed, the door ajar. Yet the air felt distinctly different in that corner, slightly cooler, a gentle, almost imperceptible shift in temperature. Then she noticed it. On the small writing desk beneath the window, where Eleanor had undoubtedly spent countless hours, there was a faint shimmer. It was incredibly subtle, almost like heat haze, but it wasn't heat. It was a delicate, translucent veil, shimmering with a soft, ethereal light. It seemed to hover just above the polished wood surface of the desk, swirling almost imperceptibly. Elara's breath hitched. She wasn't frightened, not exactly. It was more a profound sense of awe, a quiet reverence. This wasn't a sudden fright or a theatrical apparition. It was a gentle manifestation, almost like a lingering echo. The shimmer pulsed faintly, a soft, silent heartbeat in the air. As she watched, mesmerized, a single, delicate forget-me-not seemed to materialize within the shimmering mist. It was translucent, a ghostly blue, perfect in its ephemeral form. It hovered for a moment, vibrant and clear despite its transparency, before slowly, gracefully dissolving into the air, leaving behind only the faintest whisper of lavender. Elara didn't move, didn't speak. She simply watched, her heart full. It was a final, tender farewell from Eleanor, a gentle acknowledgement of their shared journey. The forget-me-not, the symbol of enduring remembrance, was her last message, a silent thank you for unearthing her story, for remembering her love. The scent of lavender, so faint yet so distinct, was her personal signature, a final caress from the past. The room returned to its quiet stillness, the shimmer gone, the air now simply still. But Elara felt a profound sense of peace wash over her, a quiet understanding. Eleanor wasn't trapped in sorrow anymore. Her story had been heard, her love honored, and her spirit, it seemed, was finally at rest. The house, once a repository of hidden grief, was now a sanctuary of remembered love. The whisper she had felt was not a haunting, but a gentle release. The ethereal appearance of the forget-me-not in Eleanor's room was a profound and beautiful culmination of Elara's journey through Blackwood Manor's hidden past. It wasn't frightening. It was a gentle benediction, a silent thank you from a spirit finally at peace. Elara felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for uncovering a historical secret, but for giving a voice to a love story that had been buried for centuries. With Eleanor's story finally understood, the house seemed to settle even further. The creaks were no longer mysterious. They were just the sounds of an old house breathing. The shadows no longer held hidden sorrows, but rather the gentle memories of lives lived within its walls. Blackwood Manor wasn't a place of melancholy anymore. It was a sanctuary of remembrance. Elara continued with her renovations, but now with a heightened sense of purpose. She meticulously restored the library, ensuring the books were properly cared for, imagining them as silent witnesses to Eleanor's life. She dedicated a small, sunlit corner of the room to Eleanor and Arthur, placing the small wooden box with the forget-me-not and Arthur's miniature portrait on a restored antique table. It was a subtle personal memorial, a quiet acknowledgement of their enduring love. Liam, who had been an invaluable partner in this historical detective work, often visited, not just to check on the house, but to share in the quiet peace that now permeated it. He too felt the shift, a palpable lightness that replaced the previous melancholic air. Their friendship, forged in the crucible of a forgotten tragedy, had deepened into something truly special. They would often sit in the library, sipping tea, the silence comfortable and warm rather than heavy. Elara found herself spending more and more time in Blackwood Manor. Her initial escape from city life and a broken heart had turned into a profound connection to a place and to the lives that had unfolded within its ancient walls. The quiet evenings, once filled with her own introspection, now held the gentle echo of Eleanor's story. She felt less alone than she had in years, finding companionship in the unspoken narratives of the house. Sometimes in the quietest moments, usually when a particular ray of sunlight caught the dust motes just right, or when the wind sighed softly through the old chimneys, Elara would feel a familiar gentle chill, almost like a loving caress. It was never startling, never alarming. It was simply there, a quiet presence, a reminder of Eleanor's gratitude, a whisper of peace. She never saw another shimmering forget-me-not, nor did she feel any fear. It was as if Eleanor, having shared her story and found her peace, had simply settled into the fabric of the house, a comforting and protective presence. The letter hidden in the bookshelf, meant for Arthur, had found its way to Elara, and in doing so, had released two souls from their centuries-long vigil. Blackwood Manor, once a forgotten house shrouded in mystery, had become a home, not just for Elara, but for the remembered love of Eleanor and Arthur, and the quiet devotion of Martha. It stood as a testament that some stories, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to be told, and some loves, no matter how tragic, will always find a way to endure. Not all spirits seek to frighten. Some just wish to be remembered. If their tale lingered with you, let it rest with your breath. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear a whisper in your dreams, maybe it's just the end of the story.